Okay, this video is directly from your Cold War guide. I just want to hit some high points. It goes kind of in order. I'm going to try to go back and forth. I'll move the screen. So, second video, you got to remember at Potsdam at the end of the war, the Soviets are coming from the east. The U.S. and the Allies are coming from the west, and they're coming in on Hitler. And basically, they're going to meet in the middle in Berlin, they hope. But the Hitler's on the run, and we're coming in there. So at Potsdam, they're deciding what's going to happen. We want Truman. The issue is Eastern Europe. What's going to happen? Because the U.S. is going to have free elections for everybody in Western Europe, wherever we end up at the end of the war, once Hitler's defeated. Stalin wants security. The Soviets, like we just talked about, if you watch the previous video about the history, he wants security for the Soviet Union. He's been invaded twice by the Germans, World War I, World War II. And wherever the Red Army goes, that's the Soviet Army, is where they're going to stay. So they're not going to walk away. So we're trying to convince the Soviets to let people have free elections in Eastern Europe, but Stalin won't have anything to do with it. Here's the views you were supposed to come up with in your assignment. The West sees that the communists, their view is that everybody that's communist is trying to take over the globe, that they're trying to keep converting everybody to communism, and their job is to stop it. Of course, the Soviets have the opposite view, that it's a capitalist conspiracy and the Western nations are trying to take over the globe, and that's why they're everywhere, as we'll see in a minute. So both sides, the East and the West, see each other as trying to take over the planet. So that's not a good relationship. And then Churchill comes to the United States at the end of the war, remember him, Prime Minister of Britain, Winston Churchill, and says that an Iron Curtain's been drawn across Europe. What he means is, and if you look at your maps and your text, that basically Eastern Europe's cut off from the rest of Europe because the Soviets are that Iron Curtain and they will not let anybody into the East. And he's right about that. Not a good way to start the post-war era, though. So the Cold War starts right here with the Iron Curtain speech. And then your confrontation of the superpowers section, you basically just read that there's two new powers in the world. They call them the superpowers. It's the U.S. and the USSR. I mean, that's it. We're the two big, powerful nations after World War II. We are kind of look like we do now. And then, of course, the Soviets were also more powerful. And remember, the Soviet goal is security all the time. They're trying to secure themselves from future wars. Now, the Cold War starts in different countries around the world. One of them is Greece. And I don't want to get too much into this. It's not the most important thing ever. But Greece has a civil war, and just like everywhere in the Cold War when that happens, it's communist versus non-communist. The Soviets are going to take one side, we're going to take the other, and we're going to try to push our values on those people and try to support the side that we want to win. So then you come back to the Truman Doctrine, and 1947, Harry Truman, President of the United States, remember the guy that uses the bomb? He makes a speech and says, we'll give money to anybody fighting communism. So you know what that's like a smack in the face to Stalin. He's basically saying, we're going to help anybody that's fighting against the Soviets. We will give money. We will give weapons. We will help them. So we're going to give millions of dollars to the non-communists in the civil wars in Greece and Turkey. It works out for us because the non-communists win in both places. But that's, again, another Cold War type of thing. You know, the Iron Curtain speech that says they've drawn an Iron Curtain. You've got the Truman Doctrine says we'll help anybody fighting the Soviets. So that's what the Cold War was. We never actually fought the Soviets. Then we created the Marshall Plan, which had a couple things. It was our plan to aid and rebuild, as it says here, war-torn Europe. But we had two goals. One, we don't want communism to spread. Remember what people do? They turn to radical ideas and radical leaders when things are bad. So we want the economy of Europe to rebuild. And a stabilized economy means we can do business with them. So there's a practical reason too. But that's what the Marshall Plan was. Of course, the Soviets, see us doing this as trying to buy allies, or the U.S. is buying allies. And, by helping Europe rebuild is helping us, but it's also helping them and keeping communism from spreading. So the Soviets weren't too happy. They had their own plan called the Molotov Plan, not nearly as effective. Eastern European countries, they don't take the money, of course, because the Soviets won't let them. Because the Red Army, like I said, is still in Eastern Europe. Those countries of Eastern Europe, your Polands, your Hungaries, your Czechoslovakias, aren't allowed to take the money. So Marshall Plan works in the West. They start having success. The East stays into communism. And I have to point out my final thing in this particular section. We're at the top half of your paper. The containment policy of the United States. Now let me move this down. Make sure you get this. Many of you got it. Some of you kind of skipped over this in your homework. The containment is the U.S. policy against the Soviets during the Cold War. The goal is to keep them where they are. We didn't invade the Soviets. We're not going to try to conquer the Soviets. We don't want World War III. But it's to prevent them from spreading. So wherever communism's trying to spread, you'll find the U.S. trying to keep it from spreading. Of course, that leads back to this view of conspiracies against each other. But containment, I always tell kids, is like taking a lightning bug, a firefly in a jar. You put him in the jar, what happens? He can't get out. That's what we want to do with the Soviets. Leave them there, contain them. That's our goal. So moving forward, everything we're going to talk about, the United States is always going to be trying to stop communism from spreading. So the Cold War is always us trying to keep them from getting any further than they've gotten. And that's really critical to you understand. Everything you know, make sure you understand that's the U.S. policy, because that's what you're going to see moving forward with all this Cold War information that you're going to get. So keeping communism from spreading, that's the U.S. policy in the Cold War.